Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Roth.
And I'm Rosie Murphy. This is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
This week we are watching Abandoned. It's a Shannon episode, which you may remember for a certain reason for being a Shannon episode.
Additionally, I am thrilled to get to be the one of us who shares this news with you. We had the opportunity last week to talk with the man himself, Damon Lindelof.
Yes, we have Damon on this week. We asked him all about Season 2. He's the guy.
Let's not wait any longer to get to it. So, I know everyone is eager to get to Damon, but first we have to talk about Abandoned. So, Sammy, what is your hot take?
So, I loved in the plot with the tail section, folks, this episode, just how much fun foreshadowing there was of next week. I love the build-up. We've been with them for all this time. We still don't know what's happening. And we get great lines this episode when Ana Lucia says to Echo, "I liked you better when you weren't talking."
Yeah.
It's like, ooh, what does that mean? Well, we're going to find out what that means. And then she, kind of tells the story later about how the others came and took all of them.
Then they came back and they took 9 more.
But we still don't get anything about Goodwin or any of the details of how it happened. I just love the build-up. It makes me so excited to watch the other 48 Days next week.
Exciting.
And sort of like an ancillary hot take to that, because it's related, and I'm just going to sneak it in there, is I just also was such a huge fan of Josh Holloway playing Sawyer dying slowly by bullet wound, for the entirety of this episode.
Okay.
I don't know. I just thought that it felt very much like this is Sawyer dying, but still trying to be Sawyer as he slowly dies. Some of the one-liners.
You shrink. Well, maybe I ought to talk to my shoulder.
How'd you get shot anyway?
With a gun.
Yeah, I was impressed by it. I thought it was a real fine show by Josh Holloway. Anyway.
Indeed. Well, my hot take is way more pedestrian.
That's okay.
But how in the hell does John Locke know about swaddling a baby?
I agree completely.
At one point he says to Claire, it works every time. How many times have you swaddled a baby, John Locke? We have no evidence that he has, ever interacted with an infant. Literally ever. And then he just comes in and says, oh, no, man, they like to feel constricted. And this is another, bit of a weird John Locke scene, but how the fuck does John know this thing?
I thought that was bullshit.
When was this part of his walkabout training? Many questions, all unanswered.
By the way, something else we should mention that we forgot about, there was the concert this Saturday night.
Yeah.
So I went to this concert on Saturday night. It was in Hollywood at the Ford Theaters. It was Michael Giacchino conducting a symphony orchestra and some of the selections of the score from the show.
I'm so jealous.
It was fun. A bunch of the cast, Damon and Carlton, were there. They did a Q&A with the fans. Josh Holloway, Emily de Ravine, Daniel Day-Kim. It was Rebecca Mader as well, and Andre Gabriel, who we've had on the show, who was Nadia. It was a huge party, and we have it recorded, and we'll be sharing some of it with you. In fact, all of it. We'll be sharing all of it with you later. Yeah,
so stay with us for the rest of Season 2. We have unexpected wealth of fun things to share with you.
Yes. So should we talk about the meat of this episode? The Shannon story? So
Shannon, and kind of Boone by extension.
Yeah.
So the trouble for me here in the flashback is that Boone didn't believe in Shannon's dance career either.
Did he or didn't he? Where do you get that he didn't?
I don't think so. Do you disagree?
I don't know that I disagree, but I'm on the fence. I'm curious where you read that into it.
I really got the sense during the scene where she's asking him... First she's asking him if she can stay with him for a while in New York, and then she asks him to try to get some money from his mom. And I don't know what my evidence is for this, but I just got the overwhelming sense that he also thought that this was going to kind of be a bad investment. And he thought that she wasn't going to be able, because what she kept saying was, I just need a little bit of help. I just need this one more thing. I just need this one more thing, and then I'll get there. And obviously her stepmother didn't believe that, but Boone also treated her with this reluctance when she told him, I think it's where she says something about,
I won't have to visit if I get that job at the Martha Graham Dance Company. I'll be living there.
Right. internship.
I know it's like a 1 in 3,000 chance, but I might get it.
Absolutely.
Like, I just got the sense that he didn't really have faith in her either. And we also see that on the island, right? He dismisses her as, weak, and he always calls her useless. And, like, he's not particularly nice to Shannon, even though he protects her or attempts to protect her in all these ways. And I don't have any broader insights than that, but
I guess I had a slightly different take on Boone here. The scene at the end where and this is like the last flashback scene before Shannon gets shot in the present, is where he offers her the money, and he's going to put her up in New York, and says, I'll take care of you until you can support yourself. And sure, I guess you can read that as maybe it's just patronizing, and maybe he's just doing this to be kind to her, because even though he doesn't think she's going to succeed. But I actually saw that, I thought, gee, the Boone we see on the island later probably would not have done that for her. Like, it seemed to me that things probably got much worse between Boone and Shannon after this in terms of his
I agree.
His belief in her whatever generosity existed between them at this point clearly doesn't exist later. So I saw that and I thought, gee, I get why she doesn't take the money, because she feels like everyone is against her and she has to prove herself.
Right.
But, gee, if she'd only taken the money there, maybe things could have worked out really differently for her and for both of them.
I kind of thought that too. Like, if she'd only... Because part of this is... Like, there are several things going on in the flashback, right? But and in the present, or on island. But a huge one is Shannon's pride.
Yeah.
Right? And she... in the flashback, we see she's obviously very used to having access to money. She's never had a check bounce before. This was not expected to be a problem. And then, I think understandably, she's upset because her stepmother's literally cutting her off.
I agree.
And in reality, a little bit of charity probably could have gone a long way. And if she had accepted Boone's offer, and I think part of the reason she didn't was that he was going to work for his mother, and that would have, by extension, been the stepmom's money. Because it's in that same conversation that Boone tells her he's going to work for his mother. And by that point, Shannon was too angry and indeed too proud to take that money, even though we can see in hindsight it could have made a world of difference. Or who knows, she could have gone and done this thing for 6 months and then been without a job anyway, but we have no way of knowing.
I think that's part of the key question here with Shannon, and I feel almost I feel bad for asking this, but when Sabrina, the stepmother, when she says to the stepmother, I can do it, and Sabrina's thinking, although she doesn't say it, no, you can't do it, like, could she have done it? Right.
And part of me watching that is like, this isn't like Shannon going, this is still, she says she's 1 in 3,000 or something who gets this internship.
Right.
Which you can either read, maybe in a different time, you could read as like, wow, she's really special, she's really talented, and maybe I'm just like a cynical child who came of age during the recession. But I read that as like, well, shit, you're never going to get a job doing that if you're 1 in 3,000 for an internship. But yeah, I think that says more about me than it does about Shannon.
That's an interesting commentary. I hadn't thought about it.
Yeah.
But no, I think that it's perhaps not her fault that we don't know the answer to this, but I just don't see that we ever see Shannon in a situation where she's really like taking care of herself and managing to accomplish significant life goals or anything of that nature. Like, I don't know, and I think it ties into the Saeed storyline too, where Saeed's like, I need to protect you, and he has the gun in his back pocket all the time. And on the one hand, it seems overbearing in a way, and kind of perhaps even misogynistic to an extent. But on the other hand, from Saeed's perspective, I feel like maybe that would be a reasonable thing to think, gee, Shannon really needs someone to protect her because she can't take care of herself.
Right, and she also goes running off into the jungle, like in the middle of the night.
That's not wise.
When they're yes, which is unwise. Although, in the end, so 2 things I want to bring up here. One, on Saeed, when Shannon says, like,
I know, as soon as we get out of here, you're just gonna leave me.
will never leave you.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Really, Saeed? Like, you've been chasing this woman for decades at this point, since the end of the Gulf War? Like, most of Shannon's life? And you're really?
Probably just a little over a decade, but that's okay. I get the point.
Oh, you're right. This is 2004.
Still plenty of years.
Yeah. Still.
Yes.
I was like, actually, I'm kind of on Shannon's side on that one. Like, Saeed, okay.
Yeah.
The second thing, Shannon is actually really seeing Walt.
Yeah.
Right? Let's talk about that for a second.
It is creepy as fuck when Walt shows up in the tent.
Oh my god, creepy
I jumped a
dripping
little.
Walt is so creepy. But yeah, like, what are we supposed to make of that? Because we are definitely led to believe that this is just a weird apparition. But then Saeed confirms it.
Yeah, I actually found myself watching this episode and thinking, like, gee, I never considered this, but maybe she really is just hallucinating out of stress over Boone's death.
Right.
And then I totally forgot, Saeed sees him at the end.
Right. Well, and how interesting is it that we as the viewers trust Shannon so little that
Yeah.
we assume she must be hallucinating, right? And that,
Oh,
I guess,
no.
is just good writing.
We're like Boone, we're like Saeed. We don't trust Shannon, we don't believe her.
There's no way she's going to get a real job. Yeah.
We're going to
Listen
leave
to
her.
us.
No, the other reaction that I had to that moment of Saeed with "I'll never leave you," I kind of had like a double-edged sword reaction, where on the one hand, this is sort of a hindsight, having seen the finale where they are in fact in the church together, like I think it makes it a little more acceptable, or at least it resonates a little better with me to know that, okay, in the end, like, perhaps they truly are destined to be together or whatnot. But on the other hand, yeah, I mean, we talked about this last year when we had Andrea Gabriel, who played Nadia, on the show, where it was like,
Right.
well, why isn't she in the church at the end? Like, she was Saeed's true love.
Right.
He was with
In
Shannon
the
for
Flash
40 days on the
Sideways,
island.
He was still in love with her in the Flash Sideways.
Yeah. I feel so bad that we're trying to sympathize with Shannon, and it's just becoming a conversation about, like, it really should have been Nadia, and we don't trust Shannon anyway.
I know, which in a way proves our point.
Proves
Proves the writer's point,
Yeah.
I guess. That this is sort of the overwhelming sense that we came away with.
I think one thing that I realized that I wanted watching this episode that I didn't have was more of an understanding of Shannon's relationship with her father and how the father played into it. Because the first time we meet Adam Rutherford is the scene earlier this season in Flashback where he dies on the operating table. And then that seems to be such a...
In the scene where Jack decides to save Sarah, which is something I did not know until this watch of Lost.
Did you catch Jack going through the hospital hallways?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I had never noticed that
After
before.
just having had to let this guy die, which is so sad.
Right.
But yeah, I guess I felt like maybe we'd have a better understanding with Shannon of Shannon if we understood the dynamic with her father and with the stepmother and where they all came from. I don't know, just it seemed like such a big watershed, emotional, life-altering moment when the dad dies, but we really don't know anything about him or his relationships with the rest of them.
No, and that's an interesting point. Because Shannon, at this point, is still quite young, right? Like,
I think she's
probably
18.
18.
Yeah.
And she's paying rent, so she doesn't live at home, but presumably that's relatively recent. And yeah, but clearly her relationship with her stepmother was horrible.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. It's a really good question. And I don't think I can't remember whether or not we get any answers later.
I don't think we do. I think this is the last, because Shannon's dead now. I mean, there's no more Shannon episodes.
Yep. Yes, she is.
Were you sad when she died?
I was a little, because it's such like in a way it's a tragic death because there's no fulfillment of anything in it. Like, at least when Boone died, he thought he had died for something great. And at least in later deaths, like, Charlie gets a noble death, and Jin and Sun don't really a noble death, but at least they die together. And Shannon's death just is kind of sucks. Like, she's just fought with Saeed. She doesn't think anyone believes her. She feels very alone, like very undeserving, and storms off into the jungle and gets... Yeah, well, Saeed's chasing her through the jungle.
Right, and then gets shot totally by accident in a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really rough. I mean, it's nice that she has at least the reconciliation with Saeed at the end before getting shot.
Yeah.
Like, even if that is something that we have questions about as well. Yeah, no, you're right. It's, there's really nothing redeeming here. And we don't really get any redemption for Shannon either. I mean, we're still left with these, like, really serious questions about who she is and what kind of, what kind of a person she is.
Yeah. Yeah. And we don't... She's much more villainous than Boone, I think.
Villainous?
Yeah. In the sense, in whatever way there are villains in this part of the show, I think. Like, not... Maybe villainous isn't the right word, but she's much easier to hate than Boone, after we've seen Boone for a few episodes with John Locke. And we don't get to see nearly so much a redemption. Like, when in the episodes leading up to Boone's death, when he's sort of being made John's disciple and all those things we talked about last week. Last week.
Last year.
Oh, my. Like, we get, Shannon sort of reluctantly doing the map thing for Saeed, and then we get a romance that I think to a lot of viewers is kind of inexplicable.
Yes.
And then she dies. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's tough when a character dies and, like, they weren't beloved. So
yeah,
maybe there's no way to give a character like that a noble death. Like,
well, the best time they killed characters who weren't beloved was Nikki and Paulo. That was amazing.
Good point. Solid point.
But they couldn't have done that to Shannon. That would have been rude.
I mean, this is also rude. But oh, jeez.
I did feel bad. I felt bad at the end. I felt bad that the last flashback sequence we got with her was her screaming at Boone, "I don't want the money." Mm-hmm. I felt bad that it's this weird apparition of Walt that that's never really understandable or explained, that leads her to her death. That it's a I don't know that I sympathize with her as a person, but it's certainly upsetting to watch her have to die this way.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like our last couple episodes have just been me saying, like, I'm sad. So hopefully it picks up in the future. But it is getting a little darker here in Season 2.
You're right. And there aren't a lot of those light storylines in the background like we had in Season 1.
What a good transition into this conversation with the incredible Damon Lindelof.
And Damon is truly wonderful. I mean, he gave us, like a bunch of his time and was really thoughtful and clearly, like, still enjoys talking about the show. Like, it was a treat.
Let's not wait any longer, shall we?
Hey, guys, you're on with Damon.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Damon.
Damon.
How you doing?
I'm very well. How are you?
Pretty good. Thanks so much for doing this.
My pleasure, of course.
So I'm going to be at the concert on tomorrow night, and I just, sort of the first question I have is I just think it's so cool that, like, almost a decade after you guys have, since you've been on the air, that you can pack a theater in Hollywood for an event like this. And so I guess I'm curious what you think it is about Lost that gives it such staying power, and whether that's unique in the industry that you're in, or how unique that might be.
It's always been sort of a bit, surreal for me as being kind of one of the people behind the show, while simultaneously feeling like that the cultural moment around the show is, I never cease to be amazed by it from the moment that the show premiered and realized that, oh my God, people are actually watching this thing and they're engaged in this thing. And my wife and I were in a restaurant, right around the time that the pilot aired, and we were having some breakfast, and then the people at the table right next to us were like, well, what do you think that thing in the jungle is? And I was like, oh my God, they're talking about Lost. Like, it was just the coolest thing ever, and it's just as cool now, 8 years after the show went off the air as it was, in 2004 when it went on the air, and the idea that there's a fan community that's still connected around the show. It's a special thing for anything, whether it's a song or a TV show or a movie or a book, to break through the cultural zeitgeist. And it's even more special for it to kind of stay there. And for someone who worked on the Star Trek movies, realizing that Gene Roddenberry had created that thing almost 50 years ago, before I was born, and I was getting to now do a movie version of it, and it just, it kind of stuck around. That's just an incredibly special thing. So I don't know what I attribute it to. I'm just really grateful that it did happen. And more importantly, I think the story that you guys shared, where it's sort of like, friendships have formed and relationships have formed. And I've heard stories about people who got married, but they met kind of like in lost fan communities, or people who have named their kids Sawyer because they were fans of the show. And,
wow.
those are amazing and incredibly humbling stories to tell, especially for someone who's who grew up as a fan of other people's stuff, to feel like, that's now happening around Lost is just an immensely gratifying experience.
I think maybe I'd name my kid Saeed rather than Sawyer, but that's just me.
Yes. Fair enough.
So as I mentioned, we're just a few episodes here into season 2, and wanted to kind of ask you some plot-related questions, or some questions about the themes of the show.
Oh, God.
Which
okay.
We, one of the primary themes early in this part of the show is this tension between the man of science and the man of faith, Jack and Locke, and that continues really for the rest of the arc of the series. But I guess, and Sammy and I spend a lot of time discussing that and arguing about it and trying to figure out how we feel about it. But I'm curious to know how you and the other creators arrived at that idea of science versus faith as sort of one of the central tensions of the show. Where did that come from?
I think that there was always sort of an interior sense of the fundamental idea of how weird the show was going to be. And that conversation started very early in the genesis of the show, going all the way back to before JJ and I even came to it. ABC was developing a show called Nowhere that was a very sort of traditional plane crashes on an island, people survive. So it was kind of like Gilligan's Island, the drama series. And one of the things that we identified very early on was that in order for the show to be compelling and suspenseful, that the island that the plane crashed on had to have its own inherent mythology, and that every person on that plane had to have their own inherent mythology.
Right.
And then we started to kind of talk about Charles Dickens and the idea that there, in a lot of Dickens novels, Great Expectations in particular, Oliver Twist, Tale of Two Cities, that there were these incredible coincidences that were linking the characters. And so we loved that Dickensian storytelling. And then emerging out of those conversations sort of came like, well, is there a reason that they're all linked? Like, is there a purpose? Like, is it possible that they were all brought to this island and that kind of everything in their life was leading up to this moment? And even though we didn't know that the show was going to go for 2 seasons, let alone 6, those conversations were happening very early on. And so, we had this conversation between Locke and Jack very early in season 1. I think it's the Jack flashback episode White Rabbit, where he and Locke sort of have this rather long and involved conversation where Jack has been chasing his ghost of his dead father through the island, and Locke posits for the first time, what if we were all brought here for a reason? And that was really the beginning of this question that you guys are now asking. And it was important for us to represent sort of both viewpoints, that somebody would say, I think that there's a purpose behind this, even though I don't know what it is. And somebody else would be saying, life is arbitrary and there is no purpose behind any of it, and we just have to kind of live in the moment. That's the fundamentalist conversation between religious people and atheists. And we felt like if we didn't represent both viewpoints, we were not only not doing our jobs, but more importantly, like, you know, wouldn't be taking advantage of the key potential for drama, which is, and then ultimately we knew that we'd have to come down on one side or the other, and I think that Carlton and JJ and I and many of our collaborators, certainly Jack Bender being another one, we thought that, oh yeah, it's much more interesting that they are here for a reason than that everything is arbitrary and purposeless. That wouldn't be a really interesting end game for a television show. So, but I think that's kind of those issues start to come into very harsh relief around the time of orientation in season 2 and get personified and like by in that standoff between Locke and Jack about like, Jack, put your money where your mouth is now. If you like, don't push the button. And Jack does push the button. He's unwilling to risk being wrong. And that's the beginning of Jack's progression towards the guy who's eventually going to die for the island.
Right.
Well, I, for one, am glad you didn't make a show about how life is arbitrary and purposeless.
Yeah.
That would have been fun to talk about years later. I mean, no, sort of on a related note, because, I mean, Desmond, you know, sort of personifies, I think, so much of the, you know, the idea of fate and destiny on the island. And, you know, we were really curious because he runs away after the first couple episodes of season 2, and it kind of looks like that's going to be the end of this character. And, you know, really interested in the thought process behind what made you guys decide that you were going to bring this guy back and really make him one of the stars of the show and sort of one of the central points thematically as well.
There were a number of different things that happened there that were both creative and pragmatic. I think that the first and most important is that when Ian came and did the work for those episodes, it's one thing to like audition an actor and then cast them, but then I think once he came in and performed Desmond for the first time, we were like, this guy's amazing. He absolutely needs to kind of come back. And so as soon as we saw what he did in the first couple, over the course of the first 3 episodes before he runs off at the end of orientation, I think that we were already pretty committed to the idea that when he came back for the finale of season 2, that it would be a full-on Desmond flashback episode, because we'd be very hungry to know what he was doing on the island and what he cared about. And we already kind of had this idea that he was going to be a romantic character, that like what really drove him was because lost love and regret. And then the other thing that happened was that, you know, we, in season 2, we introduced these characters from the tail section. And when we cast, Ana Lucia and Mr. Echo and Libby and Bernard, we knew Michelle Rodriguez made it a condition of us hiring her that she would only do the show for 1 season. So we knew that we were going to kill off Ana Lucia. And then along the way, we sort of had the idea of like, oh, if we kill off Ana Lucia and Libby in the same moment, that'll be super shocking, because we've been killing characters kind of one by one, and we're kind of grooming Libby to be a love interest for Hurley, and that would be really a devastating loss, and it would be very complicated for us to feel about Michael, because he obviously has to kill Ana Lucia, but Libby is not something that he's really planning on doing. He just reacts in the moment, and Harold Perrineau is such a fantastic actor, and I'll never forget the way he played that moment. And then Adewale, Akinwumi Abaje, who played Mr. Echo, he really just hated Hawaii. And like, I think that a lot of the he's from London. That people would say like, oh my God, that it must be so amazing to live in Hawaii and do a show. And it's like, yeah, it's great if you're like into Hawaii, but I think that like you have to really love that lifestyle, and the show could be very grueling for actors, because you get your episode, but then you don't work for like 6 weeks, or you're just in the background of someone else's episode. And so we never wanted any of the actors to be unhappy. And so he asked us, Adewale asked us to write Mr. Echo off the show. But he was a much larger part of the original plan moving forwards into the seasons 3 and 4 and beyond. And so we got in early into season 3 and killed off Mr. Echo, but we knew that, and so it was sort of like the death of Mr. Echo created a space for Desmond to become a much more prominent character. And I think all of those things were kind of happening simultaneously and kind of led to Desmond, moving up into the upper echelon of lost characters. But that was kind of those were all the things that were going on at the time that I recall. It's just one man's
funny because
memory.
We did talk to Ian Cusick recently, and then we spoke to him from his, he was in his home in Hawaii, and he stayed there. So I guess the opposite direction from out of Hawaii.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot what a fun conversation that was and how nervous I was beforehand.
Guys, we were nervous before talking to Damon, just so you know.
Oh, yes. So is it just me, or does he kind of have the same conclusion that we do about the science and faith conflict?
Which conclusion would that be?
Ultimately, the show's decision is that faith wins.
Yeah, no, he definitely said that.
Yeah.
Actually, what I thought was most interesting about that was that he made it sound like it was never even a question.
Yeah.
That they knew this was going to be a show about, faith and fate and destiny. Like, oh, we need to get the other side of this argument in here, to be fair to science.
Right.
Which was not what I expected.
Right, because he explained a show that decides nothing really matters, we're all going to die. That's not a particularly good place to tell a story from.
That's true.
Which I think is a decent point.
It is. It's one thing that he said that I just, on this topic, that I wondered about was he used the expression, he said Jack died for the island. That not only did Jack agree in the end that faith was the winner, but that he died for the island. And I don't know, I was thinking about whether I agree with that characterization or not. Did Jack die for the island, or did he die for the other people on the island who he knew there? Does Jack sacrifice himself because he believes that saving the island
is necessary?
Is necessary to save everyone and save humanity? Maybe I'm answering my own question that it's a meaningless distinction here. Maybe that's what it means by dying for the island, is to die for everyone.
Or are they one and the same? There could be a distinction, but dying for one could accomplish the other. Which maybe, this is just semantics at this point, but...
That's fair. I just thought it was an interesting way that he put it, that Jack was willing to die, because I hadn't thought about it that way before.
And you're right, it's not the same way that John Locke uses the island, right? For John Locke, the island is something distinct, and it has its own power, and it has its own will. And I don't think that's necessarily what Jack is dying for.
No, it's not.
In the end, but it is for the power that the island has, in order, so that many people will not die. Right, which is a different kind of dying for the island. And again, I'm worried that this is just semantics at this point, but I think there is a small distinction.
Well, no, I think there is, and I think it's a distinction that exists in people's belief in God, for instance, and what God means to you.
Yeah.
Is God an actual being that you're worshiping or praying towards, or does God represent, something in the universe that you care about?
Right. The other thing that Damon mentioned that just sort of set off light bulbs in my head was his explanation of how Desmond became the character that Desmond became, which was very reminiscent of what Henry Ian Cusick told us in our first episode of season 2, when he explained that, the last role I had played was Jesus, and I just played Desmond like an angel, and I think that resonated, and I think this is the other side of that conversation. Indeed it did.
Yeah, it's true. I found it very interesting when he said that Echo dying as well sort of created more space for Desmond to take on an even more prominent role in the show.
Yeah, I would love to know more about who they envisioned Echo to be.
Yeah. Someone actually asked this at the concert and Q&A event on Saturday night. A fan asked about what did they have planned for Echo, and Damon, as diplomatically as he could, avoided answering that question. Which I don't blame him. I mean, he's got to try not to set too many more fires that he can't put out.
Right. Well, we are grateful to have a bunch of listeners who are not the type who we like to argue about things, but we don't like to start fires. So
no, we'll be back next week. We'll be watching The Other 48 Days, which is an amazing episode, and we'll have more from Damon Lindelof.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe we get to say that.
I know. and again, we'll also have audio from the Q&A at the concert at some point soon. We're still figuring it out.
We got plans. In the meantime, you can find us on Facebook at The Hatch Podcast, on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast. Where else can they find us? I can't remember.
Just, all of their podcast apps. Make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. Helps other people find the show.
Yeah. Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen. Our cover art is by Danny Roth.
We'll see you next week.
Namaste.